How's it going, everybody? I hope your spring is treating you to better weather than mine has been. And welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time here, welcome, welcome. Today, I thought we'd mix things up a little and go over how to set up a Raspberry Pi with Raspberry Pi OS, because the Raspberry Pi Imager software and how you install the Raspberry Pi OS have changed. If you're a more skilled user, you can use the timestamps below to move directly to the stuff you want to see. Otherwise, I will lead you through the process of updating your EEPROM all the way to a fresh install. So stay tuned because we're about to begin. The first thing you're going to need to do is update your Raspberry Pi Imager. So go ahead and either install or upgrade it, as I've already done this off camera. The second thing we're going to need to do is make sure our EEPROM is up to date. And it is a good practice to check this on a regular basis because it ensures that you have the most recent security patches installed, closing any vulnerabilities that your current system may have if you're not running the most recent EEPROM version. As with any technology, there are a few methods to ensure that our firmware is up to date. If you are already running Raspberry Pi OS, we can type a few simple commands in a terminal window, or we can download the latest from the GitHub repository and then burn that to an SD card. But if this is the route we're going, I prefer to use the Raspberry Pi Imager because it is simple to do from the software menus rather than searching it down in GitHub. I know, lazy, right? We do have a few requirements in order to accomplish this. And since you're watching this, I assume you have the first requirement, which is a reliable internet connection. But you will also need a micro SD card writer, a keyboard, a mouse, a monitor, and a micro HDMI to HDMI cable. However, if you wish to SSH into your Pi, you won't need a separate keyboard, mouse, or monitor. Before we begin, if you don't already have Raspberry Pi OS installed and just want to update your firmware, I suggest you jump to the EEPROM Imager section and go from there. If, however, you're already running Raspberry Pi OS, just open up a terminal window. The shortcut to do this is Control-Alt-T. And if you're SSHing into your Pi, go ahead and do that, and I'll meet you in the terminal. Let's just make that a little bit bigger. Now, the first command we're going to run is the update and upgrade commands. And just real quick, you should note that we're going to be using the sudo command, which just means super user do, and it does require your password. Basically, it just elevates you to root level access for the command that's going to follow it. Okay, so the commands that we're going to use are sudo apt update, and then the second command that we're going to run is sudo apt full upgrade. And as you can see, mine has been done because unfortunately, the first time that I recorded this, I had no audio, and now I'm just going through the commands so that you can see the process. And we just use the full upgrade command as opposed to just the simple upgrade command. And the reason for this is because it will pick up any dependency changes that may have been made. And then after you've done your update and full upgrade, if you're running low on space, and it is best practice anyway, let's remove some of the unused or obsolete files with these commands. So they're just going to be sudo apt auto remove, and sudo apt clean. Now we're going to actually check to see if there is an EEPROM update available with this command. Let's just clear the screen. So it's going to be sudo RPi EEPROM update, and that's going to check to see if your bootloader is current. As we can see in mine, it is current. However, if this worked the first time, it wouldn't have been current. So we'll just assume that it is not current. The next command that we're going to run to actually make it do the update is, again, if you just press the up arrow It'll bring up the last command, and we're going to add the flag -A and hit enter. And if there was an update to be done, you would have gotten a message saying that in order to do this update, you have to reboot the Raspberry Pi. And if for some reason you made a mistake and you don't actually want to update your bootloader, the command that you would run before rebooting is just going to be the same thing, except instead of the -A flag, we're going to use the -R flag, and that will remove the EEPROM update. So with our system ready to do an update, but mine really isn't, the next command you're going to run is sudo reboot now, and that will just reboot the Pi. Now, if terminal commands are not your thing and you want another method, we can jump into Raspberry Pi Imager. Once it is open, just click on Choose OS and scroll down to Miscellaneous Utility Images. Once you click on that, then you will click on Bootloader, and then I always choose USB boot so that I have the option to boot from USB first if I don't have an SD card in. But if you don't have USB plugged in and you have your SD card, it will boot from the SD card second. Once that's selected, we just go ahead and choose our micro SD storage device and then click Write. We'll wait for it to finish and then remove it from the computer and insert it into the Raspberry Pi. When you power on the Pi, after a few moments, the green activity light should start rapidly flashing. If you have an HDMI plugged into a monitor, the screen will turn green if it successfully wrote, or it'll turn red if it failed. And if it was successful, you can turn off the Pi and either insert your SD card with your previous OS, or you can run through the new setup as I'm about to demonstrate. Let's have a look at the new Raspberry Pi OS installation method. So I removed my SD card from the Pi and I inserted it into my computer's SD card writer. So we'll just go ahead and open up Imager and we'll pick the latest Raspberry Pi OS. So we'll choose OS and we'll choose Raspberry Pi. And we're going to just be using the desktop version because I don't want to install the full software suite because it'll load up tons of applications. And then we choose our micro SD card. But before we click Write, we see a new cog window or menu that shows up when we choose the Raspberry Pi OS now. So if we go ahead and select this window, you can see now that we can set the Raspberry Pi name, the host name, to whatever we want. We can enable SSH, and we can also change the default Pi user to whatever we want. And we can also configure wireless LAN if we have one and set our locale. So what we're going through here is mostly used for headless configurations, and this part is optional. We don't have to put anything in here at all. We could have just left it all blank. It's making us choose a password. So we could have left that all blank and then just clicked Write. And what would happen is the first time we load up our Raspberry Pi, it would take us through a startup wizard, but that wizard cannot be bypassed. And I kind of alluded to it earlier, but when I mentioned a headless setup, it's just one that does not have a keyboard, mouse, or monitor plugged in, and your only access is through SSH. So now that we have it pre-configured, let's click Write, and when it's done, we can go ahead and put it into our Pi and power it up. So I will just let that continue to write, and I will see you on the desktop when it's complete. All right, so Raspberry Pi has now booted up. So the first thing we're going to do is do the update and upgrade of our installation. So same as before, just jump into the terminal and run those update and upgrade commands. So that command to open the terminal was Control Alt and T. And then we just type sudo apt update. Oh, it is failing because our network is not connected. So we'll just go ahead and connect the network. Okay, so let's try that again. And actually, we'll just change up the command. We will do the update, and then we'll just add and sudo apt full upgrade. So what that's going to do is it's going to run the first command, the update, and then after that completes, it will run the full upgrade right after. So while that is doing its thing, I thought I would take a break from my normal content, which has been the Home Assistant videos that I've been making, and dive a little bit more into the Raspberry Pi. In my next video, I will be looking at some lightweight Linux distributions or distros that we can run on our Pi. I'm not going to go into detail on the setup process of each. It'll just be a preview, but I will bring you along once it has been set up and you can see the first boot, where we will just poke around a little bit before moving on to the next distribution. And the great thing about doing this is it's an excellent method to learn about Linux as it sharpens your troubleshooting skills, because you are going to run into little bits of problems here and there with it. So while that is finishing up, I will be leaving you now, but I hope this has been helpful for you. And if you've made it this far in the video, I really appreciate you. I'd love to hear from you in the comment section below, and I hope to see you in future videos. Goodbye.